Hello, my friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family.
Oh, happy day. We got some good stuff here.
Oh, yes, this is always a great
It is.
topic. And this is one of those topics that really gets censored. It's like they really don't want the truth of this coming out. And so here we see ancient race of white giants described by Native American legends. And again, these quote unquote myths, which probably are not really myths, they are definitely based in some sort of truth. They're global. It's not just one people that speaks about this. This is a global thing. Several Native American tribes, all separated by some distance, have a similar legend. A race of white giants once walked the earth but were eventually wiped out. So we see the Comanches. Chief Rolling Thunder of the Comanches, a Great Plains tribe, once gave the following account of a race of white giants in 1857. Innumerable moons ago, a race of white men, 10 feet high, and far more rich and powerful than any white people now living, here inhabited a long range of the country, extending from the rising of the setting sun, so all the way from the east coast. Their fortifications crowned the summits of the mountains, protecting their populous cities, situated in the intervening valleys. They excelled every other nation which was flourished, either before or since, in all manner of cunning handicraft. They were brave and warlike, ruling over the land they had wrestled from its ancient possessors with a high and haughty hand. Compared with them, palefaces of the present day were pygmies in both arts and arms. Rolling Thunder stated that the Great Spirit wiped out the white giants when they forgot justice and mercy and became too proud. Isn't that interesting? That sounds just like the biblical Nephilim, does it not?
Yeah.
You know?
It sounds surprisingly similar.
Oh, it's basically the same story. And the Navajo also spoke of a race of white giants called the Starnake people. Starnake, that's interesting. Their legend describes them as a regal race of white giants endowed with mining technology. Mining technology. This is really sounding very Anunnaki-ish, which, as we said, all the Bible stuff comes out of the Sumerian texts. And they dominated the West. They enslaved lesser tribes and had strongholds all throughout the Americas. They were either extinguished or went back to the heavens.
How would they get back to the heavens?
Yeah, exactly. Unless they were using ships or Merkabas, right? So again, and there's always a few. There's less now than there was in the past, as people are waking up to the fact that, of course there's life out there. We're not the only beings on the only planet. That's really ignorance. It's extreme ignorance. And but it's conditioning that's brought on by the dominant powers that be. I mean, because that's what the church was teaching, all going back to Constantine in 325 A.D. with the Council of Nicaea on forward. They were teaching that, earth-centric. You could be boiled alive, burned on the stake if you said anything other, and many people were. And still that fear-based ignorance is still out there. But ignorance it is. And yet, at the same time, it's wonderful that there's less and less people that are believing the false narrative that's been out there to keep us in a limited frame of mind so we can be totally controlled and manipulated. So fascinating. They were either extinguished or they went back to the heavens, and they were miners. Yeah, I mean, this goes along perfectly with, again, the Anunnaki tales. And by the way, 86% of Nevada is owned by the federal government. And, just for instance, looking at Nevada, there's still massive mining operations underway looking for gold. So, whether we realize it or not, we still could be mining the planet for the Anunnaki.
Yes, absolutely. We sure could.
The Choctaw told of a race of giants that once inhabited what is now Tennessee. Their ancestors fought against them when they arrived in the Mississippi during their westward migration. Their tradition talks of the Nahulo, their name for the giant race, and their wonderful stature. The Manta people of Peru say there were once giants that lived amongst them. According to their legend, they arrived on the coast in boats made of reeds, as big as large ships, a party of men of such size, from the knee downwards their height was as great as the entire height of an ordinary man, although he might be of good stature. Their limbs were all in proportion to the deformed size of their bodies, and it was a monstrous thing to see their heads with hair reaching to the shoulders. Their eyes were as large as small plates. The natives believed that heaven wiped them out due to their sexual habits, which the natives found revolting. Sounds like our elite, sounds like interbreeding, and, how does a non-physical being breed with a physical being? So, and would a non-physical being, would an angel, a true angel, need to use a ship or a vehicle to go back up to the heavens? No. So again, this is how there are angels and there are angels, and again, this is how everything has been so misinterpreted in the Western mind, because of the control grid that's been laid down. And just look at the dominant culture that's been on the land. It's the Western tradition that has dominated and also eradicated so many of these natives and their beliefs. Also, perhaps because they have a lot more intuitiveness, because they've been in touch with Mother Earth, and perhaps, just like with poor Tibet, the Tibetan spiritual practices are such that it basically leaves you with greater perceptive abilities, ability to discern. I don't think there's anywhere near as many people in modern Western culture, because you're kept so busy just slaving away, trying to keep up with the Joneses, working for the corporations, not spending hours and days in meditation, not spending, a lot of time out there with just the earth, listening to, the birds, listening to what the insects are telling you and what the animals are telling you, being able to read signs and know what's coming. We're too busy just stuck in traffic. So, and then also when you look at running to the doctor because, you have allergies or you have this or you have that, and all those things, all those chemicals change your perceptive abilities. They dull your perceptive abilities. Drinking, high fructose corn syrup and ingesting a ton of sugar and all sorts of GMOs and fluoridated water. No wonder so many people can't perceive anything and can't understand how people can be perceptive, intuitive, and have the abilities that some do. It's a matter of how you live and how you treat yourself and your body, and how much time you dedicate to spiritual practices. And so many of the indigenous people, their whole life was a spiritual practice in motion.
Yeah.
And it's not the case with this society. And this society's been brought out for that very reason, to deaden our abilities, to lower us, to keep us in a fear-based mindset. Oh, and the Giants of Lovelock Cave, that one, the last time I talked about that, I got into problems on the channel. It's interesting. There's certain ones especially that they don't want knowledge coming out of. But the Paiutes have an oral legend of red-haired, white, and I'm not even going to say that word, giants that stood over 10 foot tall and lived near Lovelock Cave in Nevada. It's hard to know for sure if this is an oral tradition or is true, or if the truth has been distorted over time and these are just normal-sized people with horrible eating habits that lived near Lovelock Cave. Some similar Paiute legends feature the same story, just without the giants as well. And archaeologists have found remains of people with red hair in the area, which is obviously not the usual. The Timucua people, native to northeast and north central Florida and southeast Georgia. They were the largest indigenous group in the area, consisted of about 35 chiefdoms, many leading thousands of people. The various groups of Timucua spoke several dialects of the language, and at the time of European contact, the territory occupied by these speakers occupied about 19,200 square miles and was home to between 50,000 and 200,000 Timucuans. It stretched all the way from the Altamaha River to the Cumberland Island in present-day Georgia, as far south as Lake George in central Florida, from the Atlantic Ocean west to the Wasilla River in the Florida Panhandle, though it reached the Gulf of Mexico at no more than a couple of points. Spanish explorers were shocked at the height of the Timucua. The Timucua had dark skin, usually brown and black hair, and they wore clothes made from moss and cloth created from various animal skins. How big were they? So interesting thoughts. And when we look at it, there's tons of evidence out there. We have found so much evidence which has been destroyed. Thank you, Smithsonian. This is a massive cover-up. Now, so many of these giants had double rows of teeth. And there are still people that have the same thing, as obviously there's some DNA that is still around in us. And we know that humans mix their DNA with Denisovans and Neanderthals as well. Again, double rows of teeth, 6 fingers, and 6 toes. These were very, very common things. And all over America, these bodies were found. The Americas, in fact, both north and south. And it's fascinating to see these paper clippings, which there are a ton of them. Like here you see a giant skeleton 18 feet tall found. Do you think this is just BS? I mean, this is Friday, July 11th, 1919. And you have a Dr. Pierce, a professor of anthropology at University of Texas, talking about it and talking about all other records of giants too. We have evidence of this, and it's been, just suppressed and wiped out. And there's, been times when DNA has come back and shown that it's something different. As we look at the Paracas skulls, for instance, and when we look at Bigfoot as well, it tends to have a conical head, which is curious as well. And then you have some people that have 6 fingers and 6 toes still. And I just wish we had all the skeletons that they had unearthed. And you see the big one, and check out the little one too, because there are also the little people. Legends of the little people as well, tons. So the Cherokee called them the Moon People. The Utes and the Paiutes spoke of a hideous race of, again, those people with horrible eating habits. This is all over. Look at these representations of what they found here. And then, of course, you go to the biblical tales where Joshua came upon them and we were like ants in their presence. And thus, that is the reason given often when people question, well, why did they kill every man, woman, and child in Jericho but save the gold? Well, because they were killing the offspring of the Nephilim is what is given as a justification for an extermination of a people. But then, of course, we know there's so many indigenous people that have been exterminated and kicked off their lands that weren't giants. They were just simply people that didn't have the weapons. They didn't have the know-how of the European invaders that came in. And time and time again, there's all different reasons that are given for justification of doing wrongs. But it's fascinating. This one here says, were they possibly Denisovan hybrids? But, the Denisovans weren't that big. That's not the case. And it's interesting, though, that Denisovans and Neanderthals both have larger brains than we do, and yet somehow we're here and they're not, which is really, really curious. And as we see here again, just getting into all the different peoples that talk about this, Comanches too, it's a universal thing. It's universal. It's not given to any one tradition. And there are some that think, well, maybe they were Atlanteans. Maybe they were Atlanteans. Maybe Atlantis was based in the U.S. Or perhaps, Atlantis was truly an island that went under, but was also in the U.S. As we know from occult legends and the secret societies, there are so many rituals with the founding of the United States kind of representing New Atlantis.
Right. I mean, there's just so many questions and so many different answers to these questions. You just never really know. So you have to step back and use your critical thinking abilities to figure out what do you think happened.
And the legends of Atlantis, they were a very advanced civilization. They were more advanced than those around them, more powerful as well, and they kind of grew a little bit haughty, and they were destroyed in a day. So very, very interesting. And there's a lot of things that have been hidden up, especially the DNA, the genetics. And when we look at the plague that's upon the land right now, too, it seems to target certain peoples much harder than others. When we were in Navajo Nation, we got from people there that what they were finding was that, there was a ton of them that were suffering greatly from this plague that's upon the land. And it's interesting how it's targeting certain peoples. Perhaps, it's all about removing, again, any sort of trace of the history of beings, again, that went before us. And we've talked about the Tower of Babel incident millions of times. And, it being, perhaps it's a DNA event. The second chromosome, just look to that and the fusing of that and all that junk DNA. So all very, very fascinating stuff. And, were there giants? I think there were.
Yeah, definitely. I feel there absolutely was. Many, many giants.
Guys, thank you so much for your support on Patreon and Ko-Fi. As always, God bless and namaste.
Namaste.